What if I told you that one family, wealthy, polished, and respected, managed to fuel one of the deadliest drug epidemics in history, without ever stepping foot in a dark alley, without wearing a gang's colors, and without firing a single shot? What if I told you that their weapon wasn't cocaine, heroin, or meth, but something far more legal, far more trusted, and far more dangerous: prescription drugs? This is not the story of a cartel. This is not about Pablo Escobar, El Chapo, or street dealers. This is the story of a powerful American dynasty whose name once stood proudly in museums, universities, and art galleries, but is now cursed as the family that drugged America. Yes, I'm talking about the Sackler family. Stay with me, because once you hear this story, you'll never look at a pill bottle the same way again. The beginning of a legacy. Before we get into the crisis, let's rewind. The Sacklers didn't begin as villains. In fact, they started as doctors. In the mid-1900s, three brothers, Arthur, Mortimer, and Raymond Sackler, began building their reputations in medicine. Arthur Sackler, the eldest, wasn't just a doctor. He was also a marketing genius. He revolutionized how pharmaceutical companies promoted drugs to doctors. Back then, advertising in medicine wasn't flashy, but Arthur changed the game. He created glossy ads, sponsored medical journals, and convinced doctors that certain drugs were safe, even when they weren't. One of his first big wins? Valium. With Arthur's marketing strategies, Valium became a household name, prescribed for everything from anxiety to sleeplessness. By the 1970s, it was the most prescribed drug in America. It seemed like a triumph. But what the Sacklers had really discovered was a formula: create a drug, market it as safe, convince doctors to prescribe it widely, profit endlessly. This formula would later lead to disaster. The birth of Purdue Pharma. Fast forward to the 1990s. The younger Sackler brothers, Mortimer and Raymond, took over Purdue Pharma, a relatively small pharmaceutical company at the time. Purdue's scientists developed a new painkiller, OxyContin. Now, here's where the story takes a dark turn. OxyContin wasn't just any painkiller, it was a powerful opioid, similar to morphine, but marketed as less addictive. How did Purdue manage to convince doctors and patients that a highly addictive opioid was safe? Through the same playbook Arthur had pioneered decades earlier. They launched aggressive marketing campaigns. Sales reps were trained to tell doctors OxyContin had less than a 1% risk of addiction. They gave away free samples. They hosted fancy conferences in resorts to educate doctors. They even targeted small-town doctors, knowing they saw patients with chronic pain. And the result? Prescriptions skyrocketed. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, OxyContin was everywhere. The epidemic unfolds. At first, it seemed like a miracle drug. Patients with back pain, injuries, or post-surgery recovery felt relief. Doctors believed they were helping. But slowly, the cracks began to show. People built tolerance, needing higher and higher doses. Others became dependent, unable to function without the pill. Some began crushing and snorting OxyContin for an instant high. And then, the deaths began. By the early 2000s, communities across America were drowning in opioid addiction. Small towns in West Virginia, Ohio, and Kentucky were hit especially hard. Let me paint a picture. Pharmacies in towns with only a few thousand people were dispensing millions of pills per year. Families were torn apart as parents, children, and grandparents became hooked. Emergency rooms saw a surge in overdoses. And yet, Purdue kept pushing OxyContin. Why? Because it was making them billions. By 2001, OxyContin was generating over $1 billion in annual revenue. The Sacklers, once humble doctors, had now become one of America's richest families. Profits over people. Here's the shocking part. Purdue knew about the risks. Internal documents later revealed that executives were aware of abuse early on. But instead of pulling back, they doubled down. They blamed addicts. They blamed doctors. They blamed anyone except themselves. They even pushed for higher dose pills, which were more addictive because they brought in bigger profits. Imagine this. A family in rural America loses their son to an overdose, while at the same time, the Sacklers are unveiling a new art wing at a museum with their name proudly displayed. The contrast is chilling. The crackdown begins. Eventually, the truth couldn't be hidden. In 2007, Purdue Pharma pled guilty to misleading the public about OxyContin's risks. They paid over $600 million in fines. But here's the catch. The Sacklers themselves were untouched. They remained billionaires, their fortunes safe. The epidemic, however, didn't stop. As people grew addicted to OxyContin, many transitioned to heroin when prescriptions ran dry. Later, fentanyl, a synthetic opioid far stronger than OxyContin, flooded the streets, making the crisis deadlier. Today, opioids have killed over 500,000 Americans in the past 2 decades. That's 500,000 lives, 500,000 families destroyed, and it all traces back to a single pill. Fall of a dynasty. By the 2010s, lawsuits piled up. States, cities, and families took Purdue and the Sacklers to court. Documents were unsealed, exposing emails and memos that showed how deeply the Sacklers were involved in pushing OxyContin despite knowing its dangers. The once respected family name became toxic. Museums like the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Louvre began removing the Sackler name from their galleries. Universities rejected donations. Their reputation crumbled. In 2019, Purdue filed for bankruptcy. The Sacklers agreed to pay billions in settlements, but critics argue it's not enough compared to the damage done. The dynasty that once stood as a beacon of philanthropy is now remembered as the family that drugged America. Real-world impact. Now, let's step out of history for a moment. Think about this. How many of us know someone who's struggled with painkillers? It could be a friend who got injured at work, a relative recovering from surgery, or even a neighbor dealing with chronic back pain. What started as a prescription turned into dependency, and sometimes tragedy. This epidemic isn't just about statistics, it's about real people. A mother in West Virginia who found her teenage son lifeless on the bathroom floor. A veteran who returned home, got prescribed OxyContin for injuries, and spiraled into addiction. Entire towns where jobs disappeared, hope vanished, and pills became the only escape. This is why the Sackler story matters. It's not just corporate greed, it's about how marketing, misinformation, and money can literally change the course of a nation's health. A global ripple effect. The opioid crisis didn't stay in the US. Exports of prescription opioids and imitation drugs spread addiction globally, affecting Canada, Australia, and parts of Europe, proving that corporate greed can have worldwide consequences. Lessons learned? Here's the question we all have to ask. Did we learn anything? The opioid crisis taught us that big pharma can't always be trusted. Doctors can be misled, marketing can kill, and yet, new drugs are always being developed, always being advertised. Could history repeat itself? Some say yes. Look at the way weight loss drugs are being hyped today, or how psychiatric medications are marketed as quick fixes. The Sackler saga should be a warning sign. When profit outweighs ethics, society pays the price. So, what do we take away from this story? The Sacklers may never face prison. They may still live in luxury, but their legacy is poisoned. Their name will forever be tied to one of the greatest public health crises in American history. And it forces us to ask tough questions. How much influence should one family or one company have over our health? Who do we trust when the very system designed to protect us can be bought and sold? Because at the end of the day, the Sacklers didn't act alone. Doctors prescribed, regulators looked away, politicians took donations, society was complicit. But knowledge is power. By telling these stories, by asking these questions, we shine a light on the truth. And maybe, just maybe, we prevent the next crisis. If you found this story eye-opening, don't let it stop here. Hit that like button. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's most shocking truths. And share this video, because everyone deserves to know how one family drugged America.